Joining me now, Dr. Aaron Kheriarty, author of the book, The New Abnormal, The Rise of the Biomedical Security State. And I am glad he wrote the book. I hope you read the book because what happened during COVID in this country, in the world, frankly, was horrific. I hear a lot of people today saying things like, well, we got some things wrong. Things were wrong during COVID. No. This went way beyond wrong. This was tyrannical and evil. Doctor, first, what do you mean, biomedical? What are all these big words? What are you talking about?
So what I call in the subtitle, the biomedical security state, is really the welding together of three things that used to be distinct. The first element is an increasingly militarized public health apparatus, and I describe in detail in the book what I mean by that. That militarized public health apparatus is then wedded to the second element, which is the use of digital technologies for surveillance and control of populations. Think of the vaccine passport that was rolled out in many places during COVID that required citizens to show a QR code demonstrating that they had done what the public health authorities told them to do. In this case, injecting a novel vaccine into their body that they may or may not have wanted, just to get on a plane, get on a train, go to a restaurant, or re-enter their country of origin. We know now, as was revealed a few months ago when Vice broke the story, that the CDC has been gathering unauthorized data from cell phones to use for tracking compliance with things like lockdowns, school closures, the closures of churches in the United States during COVID. This was done without public notification. It was certainly done without public consent. Most people were not aware that this was happening. Researchers have showed that even though this data was supposed to be de-identified, with only 4 data points, you can readily identify the specific individual that each of the data points refers to. So this was not anonymized data. It was done without the consent of the American people. The same thing occurred in Canada, even though Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau reassured Canadians that this would not be done in Canada. They did it anyways. So a militarized public health apparatus, the use of digital technologies like smartphones and smartphone-related data, and all of that is backed up by the police powers of the state, creating a regime that is ever more intrusive into the privacy and the health-related decisions and the lives of Americans. I mean, think about during COVID, the sort of micro level on which these controls began to operate. Pull your mask up over your nose, this sort of thing. This level of surveillance and control of entire populations for supposed public health purposes has never been done before in human history. And many of the interventions like lockdowns also have never been done before in human history, despite efforts to draw analogies to quarantine measures of the past. Lockdowns were a novel and wholly untested measure that we now know did massive collateral damage without actually achieving their public health purpose of stopping the spread of COVID.
Why? Let's get to that's horrific, and it's all true. How did we get to that point? Like, how did this cabal join together? If America wasn't like that when I was a kid, and it wasn't, why are we like that now? What happened?
So we're starting to see the melding of state and corporate interests. What is called corporatism, or actually coincides with the original definition of fascism put forward by Mussolini and the Italian fascists in the 1930s, which is the melding of state and corporate power. So one example of that is the censorship regime that was deployed during COVID to control the flow of information online and to silence people like me and others who were challenging COVID public health policies. So our audience may have heard of this case, Missouri v. Biden, that was filed by the attorney generals of those 2 states against senior officials in the Biden administration. And I happen to be one of the private plaintiffs, the 4 private plaintiffs in that case. And we are alleging that the government was colluding with social media companies like Facebook and Twitter to censor COVID dissenters, COVID policy dissenters and create a false sense of a scientific consensus around things like lockdowns, vaccine mandates, vaccine passports. Arguably, private social media companies can decide to take people off their platforms, but inarguably, the federal government cannot do that, cannot lean on these companies under the threat of regulation to control the narrative around COVID. But that's our evidence is suggesting that's precisely what they did. One positive development in that case is that the judge recently approved our request to depose Anthony Fauci and several other senior members of the Biden administration, including the Surgeon General, the previous and the current press secretary, Jen Psaki and Jean-Pierre. And I'm not at liberty to say when and where, but Anthony Fauci's deposition has been scheduled for the near future. So that's going to happen very soon. This will be the first time that Fauci and other senior administrative officials will have to answer some pointed and difficult questions under oath with the threat of the penalty of perjury regarding not only their role in pandemic decision-making, but our alleged, our allegations claiming that they also collaborated with these private entities to make sure that dissenting opinions were silenced and sidelined.
Should children be getting this jab?
No, there's no reason for healthy children to require a COVID vaccination. Healthy children are not at risk of bad outcomes from COVID. The tiny handful of cases that have resulted in mortality in children are in children who are very, very sick, the kind of children who could die from the common cold or from influenza. And so COVID, fortunately, this is one of the silver linings in this whole debacle. Fortunately, children are not at high risk from COVID, but we do know that there are risks associated now with the vaccine. So to subject children to any degree of risk, no matter how small, doesn't make any sense unless they can potentially benefit from vaccination. So there's no medical, there's no ethical argument that would support the mass vaccination of children against this particular illness. The other childhood vaccines that we recommend or require of children all protect children against diseases that can potentially harm them, measles and mumps and so forth. But COVID is not one of those diseases. And trying to vaccinate children is an attempt to use children as a sort of shield to protect adults. And a healthy or a sane society doesn't do that. In a healthy or sane society, adults take on risks in order to protect children. So this is getting our ethical bearings sort of totally upside down.
Don't miss Jesse Kelly Breaks History, Che Guevara, the latest episode of a new series available now exclusively for First TV supporters. Visit the First TV app or thefirsttv.com to subscribe and start watching today.